create a great deal of anxiety. Unfortunately, there is still a stigma attached to mental illness and to suicide. This can contribute to survivors' reluctance to acknowledge or disclose the circumstances of the death. And sometimes family members, as you are well aware, sometimes the family members disagree about what to share with others. And sometimes there's a decision made to try to keep it a secret, which makes it very difficult for the survivors to then speak openly. And often this will lead to feelings of isolation and confusion and even more shame. So suicide seems to give rise to a whole lot of conflicting, confusing emotions. We realize that the person who died was struggling, really struggling emotionally, and found themselves in intolerable circumstances, feeling hopeless. But now we can also find ourselves feeling angry, feeling abandoned or rejected, and overwhelmingly sad, broken, damaged, thinking that we were not enough to keep the loved one alive. And I think a hard part is what you believed about your loved one, about yourself, about your relationship and your world seems to have been totally shattered. So tonight, it is my hope that we can consider some ways to cope with this loss. So how do we reestablish a world order and align your life and align your loss with the overall life story? How do you keep on going? How do you chart your own path through this grief? And how do you once again embrace life? And you will hear over and over again in the loss program that there is no timetable. There are no real rules for grieving. Grief is not a test, and it's certainly not a competition. Like you, I have read many books about surviving suicide. I've also learned from Father Ruby about the importance, and for those who may not know, Father Ruby, the founder of the loss program, has said repeatedly that survivors do better when they lean into the loss, when they acknowledge it, when they find space within themselves to be in relationship with the loss and honor the fact that the feelings are very real. Now, Dr. Earl Grollman, who's a pioneer in the field of crisis intervention, and he's also the author of books on bereavement, and a rabbi, has said grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. And the only cure for grief is to grieve. I think one of the most painful parts of grieving a death to suicide is that very few people get an opportunity to say goodbye. Most often the death is a shock to the survivors. And even if your loved one had a history of prior suicide attempts, it still comes as a huge shock when it does occur. And it will leave all the survivors with a traumatic aftermath. Any sudden, violent, or unexpected death leaves one with trauma. And we know that there are many layers in suicide and no simple answers, because the one who could give us the most insight, the most answers, is the person that is no longer here with us. Okay, your pain is the key that opens your heart and ushers you on your way to healing. This is by Dr. Alan Wolfelt, who is a grief counselor, a teacher, an author, and one of the authors that has really made an impact on me. The pain. The pain is so great. I read that a mother of a son who died by suicide said it's impossible to describe the pain. She likened it to the worst emotional agony and suffering one could ever imagine, and still be alive. She said to imagine having open heart surgery without any anesthesia, And the surgeon removes a piece of your heart and creates this deep hole in your chest. And then the doctor tells you to get dressed and to go on with your life like nothing happened. From what I have witnessed over the years, it is necessary to not avoid the pain or to try to escape from it. And as Dr. Wolfelt says, it is what opens your heart and ushers you on the way to healing. It does sound kind of masochistic, but I believe one has to befriend the pain of the loss in order to get closer to it and to become self-compassionate. I think we just need to sit with it and to be with it. Sorry, I've got to move myself. Okay, grief is life-altering. Now, the sentences on this page seem to be pretty obvious. They're obvious truths. The exception to the obvious may just be the last two sentences. But loss due to suicide can be devastating. Suicide challenges our assumptions about the world. Suicide survivors themselves are an at-risk population. Survivors are usually filled with questions and concerns. Survivors experience a multitude of feelings and reactions, and most need support and comfort from others. Now, the last two sentences may not be quite as obvious, but grief is not an illness, and we do have the ability within us to heal. I think much of what we do in the loss program, in individual counseling especially, and in our support groups, is based on the ideas of solution-focused therapy. I think we try to promote survivors' strengths and their competence to help manage the grief and to help you as survivors to encourage you to build on your strengths. I know we always try to emphasize the individual nature of the grief because we respect the unique relationship that you had with your loved one. The problem is the grief, and it becomes more manageable, more normal, and less overwhelming when we can view it as a problem outside of ourselves and not something wrong with us or something pathological within us. Because sometimes grief does get pathologized, but it is not an illness. It is an experience, and it is a normal human experience. And I think we know that grief is the price of having loved and having lost. Now, in the loss program, the clinicians and the facilitators, our goal is to accompany you, to companion you on part of the journey of assimilating and integrating your grief. And as I said, we do have the ability within us to heal. You will have remnants of the wound, though. We will still have the scars, and you will never be exactly as you were prior to the suicide, but you can go on. So, survivors have told me that they have felt as though they have been dropped into a totally different world, into another country where they don't know the language or the landscape or how to maneuver through the quicksand of their emotions that drag them down into places of themselves that they previously didn't even know existed. How does one accept the knowledge that this unfamiliar landscape is now the place in which you find yourself living? How does one relearn to live in their new world without the presence of your loved one? Where life patterns are disrupted and where the shape of one's life is forever changed. Where you find yourself with a new identity. You're now a griever. You are a griever of your husband or your wife or your child or your parent or your sibling. How do we chart our path through this grief? How do you explain it to yourself? How do you explain it to others? And how do you move forward from the pain without losing the relationship? Well, I think sometimes after a traumatic loss, we may not even know how to begin or how to figure out what we are experiencing. I'd like to thank tonight Lynn Atherton, who is a member of our Wilmette loss group. We have been meeting virtually, as all the loss support groups have. And she recently shared this acronym with us, HALT. And she said she uses this because she was just to try to maneuver through her confusion. What am I feeling right now? Because the feelings were so overwhelming. So she said, am I feeling hunger? Am I angry? You know, am I feeling loneliness? Or am I tired? So I think if you can, picture this acronym in your head and ask yourself those questions, it can help you possibly give words to describe what you are feeling. Because I think what I have learned from survivors is they are undergoing so much confusion and so much pain that they can hardly figure out what they are feeling themselves. Okay. I don't know can you see the top of this? I hope. Mm-hmm. Yes. It says, how are you? Okay. And then you have all those people that ask you this. How are you? How about that question? I am certain you get asked this. How many of you finding yourself giving that answer? Fine. Maybe you say fine just to deflect the attention away from yourself and to move on from the question. Or maybe you're using it as an acronym itself. Maybe I feel frustrated or really fouled up. Whoops. Or insecure, neurotic, and emotional. You just may say fine because you feel people that are listening wouldn't understand at all how you feel. It could be sometimes the answer because sometimes we ourselves reject the feelings and fail to give words to them. Maybe to protect the other person who has asked us, or maybe we're just trying to protect ourselves. Sometimes we don't know how to give voice to our emotions. And sometimes that's not just after a loss. Maybe that's been the pattern of our lives. Maybe we have not developed our own emotional intelligence, also known as the emotional quotient, EQ, which is the ability to understand, to use, and manage our emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, to communicate effectively, to empathize with others, to overcome challenges and diffuse conflict. If we haven't developed this already, maybe we don't know how to give word to what we are feeling. I don't think grief is an experience that can be approached strictly from a rational thought perspective. It cannot be an intellectual exercise. We have to get deeply into our feelings. But along the way, people are going to ask you, how are you? Now with acquaintances, with people that you don't have a real deep relationship, you may want to just say something short. Well, my husband was very ill and he died as a result of his depression. I love him and miss him terribly, but he'd want me to go on. Or you just might want to say, well, some days are better than others. Thank you for asking. Or I'm just going on day to day. And there's always the answer that you can give. I'd really rather not talk about it right now, but thank you. Now with people that are friends, family, maybe even close coworkers, you might want to expand. It's up to you. It's always up to you what you share with people. In individual counseling and in our groups though, this is hopefully a safe place where you can reflect on how you are managing. And this is where we encourage you to get deep down into your heart and to open your heart in the safety of the counseling experience where you are met without judgment. Because the goal of loss is to provide and to cultivate a safe environment for you where there is no judgment and where you can tell your story in a safe place. So what coping strategies have you found to be helpful? Now, Tom Klemkin is one of our facilitators in the Wilmette group, and Tom is right now a retiree, but he's still a handyman and goes and helps people. And he's always talking to us about having his toolbox, taking his toolbox. And he will bring this image up in the group, and he will ask the members about what tools that they have in their toolbox and what they feel that they need to put in the toolbox. And so during our meetings, we will always come up with some coping strategies. So that's part of what we're doing right now tonight. What are the tools in your toolbox and what strategies can you use to promote well-being and resilience? I think one of the most important tools that you can develop and put into your toolbox is the story of your loved ones. Now, survivors have shared with me that their world has fallen apart, that it's no longer orderly or understandable to them. They've said they realize that there are parts of their loved ones that they didn't know, and their own identities have been shaken by the suicide. Many have engaged in intense review of what happened and why it happened and how others may have played a part. They examine their own role and their perceived failure to have either been supportive or to recognize the depth of the suffering and their inability to prevent the suicide. We all know things come to light in hindsight, but most survivors in time realize finally that they were not all-knowing, that they were not able to exert control over another person. And I think most survivors realize they will never know the absolute truth about the suicide. But in order to rebuild one's life after the loss, I found that a necessary healing task for survivors is to talk and to develop a bearable narrative of the suicide. One that works well for the survivor so you can get some relief from the why question. And also, in the words of Jack Jordan, who's a clinical scholar of suicidology, a narrative that is realistic and a fair explanation of what happened and why it happened and what responsibility the survivor should realistically and fairly assume for the event. Now, telling the story can be a bit scary. Remember, the decision to tell the story is personal, and the way you decide to tell it is always up to you. Telling your story, though, can bring you great strength. In the Obelisk, in the May-June issue, Becky Olson's cover story spoke of this, about maintaining perspective about the lifetime of the loved one. She talks about remembering her dad and remembering his life and not just his final day. So in your reflection on your loved one, think about all the aspects of his or her life and then develop the narrative and share the story of your loved one. And especially share it with your fellow loss survivors, with people who are safe, with people who will be able to understand you and where you're coming from. And remember, the choice with whom you share is always yours. So tell not only of the death, but tell of the life and embrace the idea of the continuity of connection. Tell who he or she was and is to you, because the relationship you have still continues. A personal choice I made for myself after my own husband's death in 2001, which was not to suicide, it was to a brain tumor. But it was now 20 years ago. My choice is that I continue to talk to him. On his birthday, on our wedding anniversary, on the anniversary of the day we met, I put my husband's picture on my table as I eat my breakfast. He starts the day with me. At dinner that evening, I light a candle as well. And again, he is with me. I encourage you to talk with your loved one. I encourage you to say the names of your loved ones. Say their names out loud every day. Seek ways that you can be in relationship with them and try to recall stories. And for every difficult story, seek out a positive one from your memory bank. Father Ruby always says that what would be even worse than their death would be that they would be forgotten. Telling their stories keeps them alive. It keeps their spirits alive. So if you have children, tell them the stories of their parent or their grandparent, their aunt, uncle, or sibling, so they come to know the person. The fact is, we will never forget them. Now, for some, looking at photographs may be helpful. For others, that may be too painful. Now, you may find that you want to ease into pictures and stories. But also, I want you to reflect on how your loved one still influences you now. My husband was a classical music lover. Before I met him, I really did not know that much about classical music. That was not part of my history. But after living with him, we only were married for 14 years. I have developed a great love of classical music. I also have a huge collection of albums and CDs of classical music. Whenever I have music on in the house, it is the classical music station, and it is all because of my husband. I also watch the gas tank in the car because of my husband. He still influences me that way. Don't let it get too low, Laraine. Okay. I also know many, many Yiddish words and phrases that I can actually say and use appropriately because of my husband and his background and his sharing that with me. So that is one way how he continues to influence me even now. And I know all of you have those kinds of things as well, that your loved one may not be here, but there is still an influence on you. Okay, in the toolbox, I think it's important to gather ideas for how we will remember our loved ones. Rituals are really important. If you have family traditions, and if it feels right, use them. If you're religious, maybe it's special prayers. I know in our support groups, we learn about how others have chosen to memorialize their loved ones. For some, it's lighting candles, the Yarsite, the Yiskar candle, that's what's pictured here. For some, it's saying prayers. For Catholics, sometimes it's having masses said. For all, it could be memorial services or having special dinners. I know after my husband passed away, on the first anniversary, I invited all of our closest friends and we went out to dinner in a restaurant that he and I had liked a lot. And it was simple. It wasn't anything big. We didn't do a lot of talking. It was just a little bit, of remembering him. And then we ate dinner in his honor. And then every November, we have an annual Loss Evening of Remembrance service. So that's another way that we can remember our loved ones. Okay. I think another thing in your toolbox would be ways to honor your loved one. Here are some actions that can help us change how we think about our losses, and it can also help us build resilience. So you may have to put a different spin on it, but even making a scrapbook, creating a photo album, framing special pictures, quilt making of clothing. When my husband died, my daughter, my only child, our only child, was 12 years old. So I took his shirts and saved a lot of them. I gave a lot of them away, but I saved enough of them in order to make a quilt. And I put this together in the next few years. So when it was time for her to go to college, she took the quilt with her. And I think that that was a really meaningful thing for her. I know it was a very therapeutic process for me. And I think for her, it was a real treasure to have, because in some ways he was able to go with her to college and beyond. So planting a tree or a bed of flowers. I know one family in the Lost program, they bought those round stones and they actually put their son's name on the stone, and they made their own little memorial garden in their backyard. For some people, it's contributing money to a charity to honor their loved one, or creating a project, or volunteering to benefit the needy or mentally ill, or some other cause that had importance to your loved one. Others have created an online memorial, and some have started a scholarship in their loved one's name. I think another thing we could do is you could honor them by doing something that your loved one always wanted to do and didn't get a chance to do. Maybe to go to the places they wanted to travel. It takes some reframing, I agree, but instead of it being sad, it's as though you're carrying on the dream for them. Maybe a tool you have in your toolbox is your own creativity. So let's take a look at some actions, some choices that lost members have embraced to address their grief, to immerse themselves in the process of finding some kind of meaning in their loss. Because please know that engaging in creative expression to intentionally work through grief is different from using these kind of actions as just a hobby or to distract oneself. It is my hope that you can look upon these possible activities as opportunities for grief expression. If you're not into journaling, write letters to your loved one. You can join the Lost Writing Group. That is a wonderful tool for healing and for building community. I was so impressed when we had the presentation about the group that Sharon Bibro does with the writing group. I've heard many people say, I just can't listen to music anymore. For me, music is a vital part of my life. It is necessary. I can't live without it. I sing in the church choir. It's important to me. But I also know for some people, it is very painful to hear some of the songs. So I would suggest maybe listening to a different genre of music. Try classical, try jazz, put on hip hop, dance, movement. Dance can be very meaningful. I know for me, whenever I hear the third movement of Gabriel Fauré's Pelléas and Mélisande, it is when that is played on the classical music station, right away, my heart leaps. That is something that my husband introduced me to, that piece of music, and it is beautiful for me. And I remember in the very beginning after he died, it was very painful. And now it is just absolutely one of the most beautiful pieces of music that takes me right back to a time when I was very, very happy. So I think as you look at some of these particular activities, you can see that you can use them to process grief. I hope everybody can see them. So maybe if you can't see them, I should just read them. Journaling, drawing, painting, sculpting, photography, poetry, writing prose, being involved in drama, music, either making music, sharing music, listening to music, dancing and movement. Making a playlist of all of your loved ones' favorite songs. So maybe you will have it. Maybe it's too painful now, but just won't want to listen to it, but maybe down the road you will, or maybe one of your children will, or someone else that cared about and loved your loved one. How else might you express and manage grief? Now, you may not think that these particular actions would be ways to manage grief, but in my experience, I've come to realize that many activities can help us to cope. Making the foods that your loved one like to eat can really be a positive experience. Having a time when you share that with the other members of your family. You are bringing your spirit of your loved one back. Now, if you're not a baker or a cook and you want to consider taking time to learn, that's a project that you can do that will hopefully have a positive result. And you can do that in memory of your loved one. I've talked to lost clients who jumped into doing crafts, who were very creative, knitting, crocheting, and needlepoint, and they did them to use that time to reflect upon and to remember and to honor their loved one. One of my clients made beautiful wreaths for the door. She did it for all the different seasons. Her son was a hockey player. She would, and he, the teams that he loved, she would make, use his favorite colors and use the team colors and the team logos of his favorite sports teams. And then she gave them away to her other relatives and asked them to remember her son whenever they displayed them on their front doors. And reading. I think reading books, this is definitely a tool that for many of us has been very, very meaningful. I know for me, I have read many books on bereavement, on loss, and also just on many other topics, but I think reading is a treasured pastime of many of us, but it is also a way to connect with others' experiences of grief, especially if you are reading books that are memoirs of other survivors. I know the book Saving Ourselves from Suicide by Linda Pacta, in which she talks about everything she learned in hindsight after her son Nick's death, is really, really meaningful. And in the group that I work usually in the Wilmette group, we will often tell people about the short daily meditations by Martha Hickman in her book, Healing After Loss. And as always, I have a copy to hold up in case you want to see. Now, Albert Hubbard says the cure for grief is motion. Well, we all know grief is physically and mentally exhausting. It is exhausting to live and to grieve without the person. Intellectually, we all know that exercise is good for our physical health and our emotional health. Physical exercise contributes a great deal to happiness, and doing it regularly can help us deal with depression, with sadness, with anxiety. But for some of us, like me, exercise is not necessarily my favorite word. So if we can change that and just use the word maybe movement or energy management, I think it might be better. Movement is good for our hearts. It's good for our heads. It really is medicine. It can change our brains. And we've become quite a sedentary culture where we park our car as close to the workplace or close to the store as we can, or we take the train. We don't walk often like our ancestors did. I read once that thousands of years ago, our foreparents walked an average of 8 miles a day. How far did we walk today? How do we generate and manage our energy? So I would definitely encourage you to try to get moving. It doesn't have to be anything huge or radical or strenuous, even though some of these activities here may be. You can just spend time in nature, but it can also be very healing. Many lost clients have shared with me how much walking in their neighborhoods have helped them, walking by the lake. Others have found that the Chicago Botanic Garden has been a peaceful place in a way that they could commune with nature, with beauty. But simply walk, and you will be amazed at what an effective tool it is for gradually helping you to heal and reconnect. Walking in memory of a loved one, walking with another person, and making it maybe a social activity, 30 minutes, 3 days a week, it can really change your life. I know many of our lost clients have participated in the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Out of the Darkness Walk, and they have found that to be very healing. One man hiked the Appalachian Trail as a way to deal with his grief after his wife's death. We may not want to go that far and do that, but for all of us, just getting out in the air and soaking up some vitamin D and moving is healing. So let me ask you, if you have any other coping mechanisms that you found helpful on your grief journey, and take a minute and you can share them in the chat box. Emily, can you see the chat box?
Laraine,
now I can see it. Now I can see it.
Okay.
I was struggling there.
No, that's okay. I wanted to make sure you could see it too. Are you able to view it now?
I am able to do it now. Okay. Tears, that is absolutely correct. Yeah. I love some of these ideas. Yeah, gardening is wonderful, making the quilts, exercising. The 8-week group, I'm getting into that. That's coming up next. Painting. A photo journal. Tears, talk, exercise, artistic expression. R is write, and S is share. Beautiful. Yeah, and Debbie says some have taken trips to scatter the ashes of their loved ones in meaningful places. Wow, these are beautiful. And the punching bag, hitting the punching bag to express and get out anger and frustration. Very good. Punching bag, pillows, yes. Okay, thank you for sharing all that. Okay. I think I have to shut that down. Yes, okay. Whoops.
Laraine, I don't know if there's something on your screen that's in front of the PowerPoint. It says move the window away from, yes, that, whatever it is.
Yeah, how do I do that again?
Can you drag it away, or? I'm not sure what, it doesn't tell me what it is. It just, I can just see there's a box there.
I had that happen the last time before. Please move this away. I'm trying. Every time I click on it, I move the screen.
I can see that. Do you want to try to just hit escape for me again and try to exit out of the PowerPoint and then try to restart it? Because I don't know what that is. It's like coming and going.
That remains.
Yes, it does. And it's not saying that it belongs to anything on your end. Huh? Let's see.
I must have put it on unwittingly, and I apologize.
No, that's okay. I'm trying to figure out where it maybe came from. I think I'm able to erase it. So
now I can't get back. I don't know how to get back.
Bear with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Yeah, just hit you can hit file.
File.
Or go to slideshow at the top, one of the two.
I can't move my picture away. Oh, there. Okay.
Yep, and then you can just
home, file.
Go back and then go over to slideshow on the same bar, but over to slideshow. A couple more over. It transitions, animations, and slideshow.
There's stuff covering that for me.
Oh.
Oh no.
Let's see. All right.
See, mute is covering it.
What is covering it?
Mute, stop video, all kinds of other things are at the top.
So that is your that's your screen share menu. Under view options probably. So okay. Let's see. Yeah, because I can see the bar, but I don't know where it's coming from. If I hit stop share, would you be able to start it again, Laraine?
I hope so.
Okay. We're gonna try it that way and see if we can do it that way. Okay, go ahead and try to share your screen again. Let's see if it went away. There we go. Okay, are you able to go over or no?
Am I able to do what?
Are you able to see the slideshow button now?
I've got my face right covering the slideshow.
You should be able to drag your face. You should be able to drag that or drag the PowerPoint, one of the two.
Okay. This is not the one I want. I do not want that one showing. Oh dear.
I think if you double click on the one you do want to show, we might be able to do it that way. No, that's not working either, huh? But you're not able to move anything out of the way. So I understand. Thanks everyone for replying in the chat. We can ignore it, but Lorraine's having trouble accessing the button that lets her actually share the slideshow. So that's what we're trying to figure out now. So Laraine, can you just hit the home button again up there? Like at the down, like over, like near insert, but the home, sorry, on the actual PowerPoint. In between file and insert where it says home.
It goes file to mute.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, Laraine, and then
okay.
I'm gonna have you just let me know when we need to switch.
Okay.
Because I am not sure how to fix that. So I really apologize. Alrighty.
We're on page 19, I believe.
All right. Still need one more?
One more.
That one?
Oh, nope, go back.
Go back.
Oh, that doesn't make sense. I'm missing number 19. Okay. Oh no, go. Okay, that one's good. Right there.
Okay.
All right. All right, we'll just go on.
Sorry about that.
I apologize. Okay, in everyone's toolbox, start this over here. We do need to have a self-care component. Self-care entails taking care of our physical, mental, spiritual health. And hopefully you can see that the ones we've mentioned so far are a part of self-care. But self-care also entails connecting, as we are, with other humans. As we as humans need to connect with other humans. It's a basic need to connect. So these are places that I would suggest that we should connect. One of the first things I suggest for most of the lost clients I see is to make sure that they see their primary care physician, to make sure that they take care of their physical health, and that they talk. They talk to friends and family, but look for good listeners. Not everyone in your circle is a good listener. My suggestion is to seek therapy, consider individual counseling, but attend support groups, connect with faith communities. Give yourself permission to have fun. It really is okay to do things that bring you pleasure, that brought you pleasure in the past. It is good to laugh. It is good to release those endorphins. It's good to have positive things happen. And plan ahead. Now in this, I would say plan ahead for painful reminders, plan ahead for birthdays, plan ahead for anniversaries, plan ahead for how you may feel on the different milestones that may be coming up within your family. When you receive an invitation, a wedding invitation from one of your child's friends and your child has died by suicide, it can be very painful knowing that your child is not going to have that experience of, being married. So these can be painful times. Try to plan ahead. Even the changing of the calendar, the year, I know that was one thing that set me back. When the year my husband died was 2001. When it got to 2002, I could not believe how undone I became, because he was never alive in that year. And that just did not feel good to me. If you're sharing a holiday or a gathering with other family members, you can talk to them ahead of time and about what your expectations might be, or maybe some possible strategies for honoring your loved ones. You may decide you want to change things up. I know for some families, I get Thanksgiving, they bring a picture of the loved one who has died. I think it's Mary and Kaylee's family who've now expanded it, and they bring pictures of many people who have passed away, and they have them sitting on a table. So they are also part of their celebration. Just as we always say in the loss program, allow yourself to grieve in your own way and in your own time frame. Do not rush yourself, because you have experienced a trauma, and healing has to occur at your own pace, not according to anyone else's expectations. And know that there will be emotional setbacks, that some days will be better than others, and even years after a suicide, you may find yourself just undone again, but that's okay. Healing does not occur in a straight line. It is not a linear process. It is very much an up and down process with steps forward and steps backward. And I would suggest if you lost your spouse, your partner, your significant other, who was also a primary means of your financial support, or with whom you shared financial obligations, to be very careful and assess your situation and exercise caution. Money issues can arise immediately if there are medical expenses, if there are funeral costs, and then all the other day-to-day bills. And so you're very likely to have a lot of questions, and proceed with caution. And if you do consult someone with someone that is very well trusted. Okay, and I'm speaking from my own experience of having a negative experience with someone who I thought was trustworthy and who did not, and turn out to be trustworthy, who took advantage of my loss. Okay, let's go to can we go to the next slide? Okay, connecting with self and others. So I can't speak highly enough about the positives that come to most of our lost members through the support groups. And I know some of you put that in the chat, that was a tool in your toolbox. I think that we have seen that groups bring tremendous comfort to struggling members. And the support groups are definitely a great tool to have in your toolbox, because grief is a very lonely, solitary, isolating experience. From my personal experience and also the experience I've had of working with clients. Opportunities to make the bereavement journey a communal experience can be vital in helping you feel support, to assure yourself that what you're experiencing is normal. It can reduce the sense of shame and isolation that you might feel. And it can also help you compare your reactions to those of other survivors and learn adaptive coping mechanisms from others who are in the same kind of a situation. And it also is a time of social exchange with much face-to-face peer support. It's been hard for us during the pandemic because we have not been in the same room. You know, we've talked about this. There is something about even the breathing of people in the room that we miss in the virtual meetings, because you sense when somebody needs to talk, or you can sense more when someone is upset, and you can focus on them when you are actually in the room. So I hopefully we'll get back to that in the future, in the near future. But please know that we are, that the groups, even as in virtual, that there is a great attention given to each person in the group. So if you're someone who hasn't been to a lot of groups, I would really encourage you just to try one, to try if you're lost your spouse, to try the spouse group, just to try different groups, and maybe to try a different one from the one you attended in the past, because now you are able to go to any group virtually. The one-on-one counseling is a great tool in the toolbox. This allows you this individual time with a therapist, and if you make a good connection with a therapist and it is helpful to you, I would say that is just such a bonus to your walking this grief journey. If you do not find someone with whom you are engaging well, ask for a different counselor. That can happen as well. We don't always make a great connection with every person. There are lots of online resources. I know some of my clients do online chat groups. There are also some blogs, and I have found that there are great TED Talks that are given by survivors of suicide that you may find helpful. So I would highly encourage you to do that also. And so connecting with self and others, this is as you can, hopefully you can see the list, but accept your emotions, focus on what you need, care for yourself, try to find quiet time, and draw on existing supports. And accept help when it is offered. After my husband died, I made a mistake of not always accepting help when it was offered. People were asking me to go to lunch. They were inviting me to be with, and I just felt I couldn't do it. And I said, I can't do it. And maybe, maybe at a later date. And I wished after a while, I wish I had pushed myself to just say, I should have done it. I should have, not that we should on ourselves, but because after they did not come back later, it was their time to offer the help. And so I would say, try to accept help when it is offered and not to be afraid to ask for help. Many of us are so rugged individualism and all that. We want to take care of ourselves, but don't feel as though you cannot ask for help. Okay, next slide. I think it's important also, though, to avoid unhealthy coping mechanisms. And there are some that are just not very positive. Self-destructive behaviors, people that use work as an escape, or sometimes taking excessive time off from work. And I know it's difficult to get back into the work scene, but when it comes down and your job is threatened and that may be your only means of financial support, I think it can be very difficult. So I would suggest, if you need to take time off, do, but not to take off an excessive amount of time. For me, I actually found a great deal of comfort in my work after my husband passed away. People that use sleep as an escape, that is not necessarily a healthy coping mechanism, or escaping through alcohol or drugs or under-eating, gambling, overspending. And then there will be some that will try to they will overcommit to activities just to be busy so they won't have to think. I think anger reactions where behavior that is physically or emotionally abusive can really be hurtful because it can hurt other people. Lots of yelling and screaming and becoming physically abusive is not a positive way of dealing with grief. We all feel that way sometimes. I can remember being in a meeting when a woman came into the meeting and she was literally screaming her pain. And as the clinician, I wasn't sure what to do. I really was not sure. I didn't know how negatively this was affecting the other members. The other members all knew what to do. They all, on either side of her, they just held her and they just told her that they had felt that way themselves, and it calmed her down immediately. I think that extreme denial reactions where people pretend that to themselves and to others that the loved one is still alive, I do not believe that's necessarily healthy. Or not mentioning your loved one's names again, or trying to erase the memory of your loved one. Those are unhealthy ways of coping. I think there was a question about one amount of time. I think it's going to differ for everybody. Okay, Debbie says it. The amount of time people take off from work vary quite a bit. I mean, we've known people that have been off for some long periods of time. There are some people that are able to get back on in a modified schedule, but you just don't want to necessarily risk losing a position if that is your only means of financial support, because that can also create additional burdens on you. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, what if you experience suicidal thoughts yourself? I think sometimes the pain of the loss is so intense that survivors do contemplate taking their own lives. I have found that many people have expressed their desire to die, I have heard them because they feel so bereft after their loss of their loved one. But if these feelings persist, or they seem to grow stronger over time, then you do need to consult. You do need to confide in a professional, your doctor, a psychologist, a counselor, because your life matters. Your life matters to your loved ones. It matters to your family and your friends. They've already been devastated by one loss, and they would be doubly devastated by your loss. So please know that seeking professional help is especially important if you are feeling extremely depressed or if you have recurring thoughts of suicide. Unresolved grief can in time turn into complicated grief where painful emotions are so long lasting and so severe that you have trouble resuming your life. Please seek help for that. All grief is difficult, all grief. But after a suicide, the grief is usually complex and traumatic.
I know. He's looking for his suit.
And as one living with the aftermath after a suicide, you are the ones who have knowledge of the pain that the death has left. Just remember, your life matters. Your life has value. Okay.
This one. It looks very small. Well, I think it'll fit Eric. That's yours? Okay. It looks like it would fit him though.
Can I ask that we please mute? Someone needs to mute, yes. Okay, going on after a suicide of someone you love will probably be the most difficult struggle. And as I said before, grief is not a linear process. Healing is not orderly in progression. Our goal is to help you to be able to grieve in a safe and confidential environment. You know, we want to assist you to be able to integrate your loss into your life and accept it as part of your personal history. I mean, we know you are able to go on. I know you are able to go on. I know and please know you are not alone. And that we do recognize the strengths that you have. I often ask people in the counseling experience, I say, in the darkest of times, where do you see any cracks of light? And I would ask you to reflect on that. Where do you see any cracks of light, any hope? I would suggest that you try to keep a daily gratitude journal where you write down maybe 2 to 3 good things that happened for you, for which you're grateful each day. Even if you don't write it down, if you practice that by just letting your mind go there. Because I think the importance of gratitude cannot be overstated, even while we are grieving. You know, being in a place of gratitude for what remains present in our lives can also help us focus that there is still some good in the world, and it can help us see that light. I would also encourage everyone to practice some kind of acts of kindness every day. Without sounding trite, I do know that doing something for others brings me some kind of satisfaction. It takes me outside of myself while I'm simultaneously helping someone else. And even if it's only bringing a smile into someone else's day, it can be a healing experience. So I would just ask that we intentionally tune into something that is good in the world, because after a death by suicide, everything can seem very dark and everything can seem very negative, but we need to make an intentional, deliberate, ongoing effort to tune into what's good in your world. And I also would urge you to think about forgiveness. Forgiveness for your loved one. Forgiveness for all the people who disappointed you and for the people who couldn't handle your grief. And for those who didn't know how to respond to you, they did not know how to respond to your pain. And I guess above all, I would hope that you could forgive yourself. Your world has been shattered and your heart has been broken, but you really are learning to live with the grief. As someone who has walked this now with probably, I don't know how many clients I've had or how many people I've worked with in the 23 years of being in the loss program, it has to be hundreds. I know that you can survive this. I have witnessed the confusion. I have witnessed the immense pain, but I've also been privileged to be with those who have befriended that pain. And they have developed a new identity as a survivor. And I have really been in awe, and as I beheld the strength and the love and the compassion that are and have been the byproducts of survivors' grief journeys and the resilience. I think the resilience of our members is just amazing to me. So I hope the presentation that was to educate you, I hope I have not just sat here and given you advice. One of our loss guidelines is that we will speak from the I position. I've tried to speak from my I position, knowing that mine is not a death by suicide, but it is a loss of someone that for whom I know that my life was totally wrapped up in. But I know the purpose of this presentation was to try to educate you. And I hope that what I know about working with survivors, I hope that has spoken to you, because I know that people whose lives have been shattered by suicide are the ones who actually do send out those little shards of light to others and give that hope. And everything I've really learned about this, I have learned from you, the survivors, and for you, I am grateful. So let me look at the next slide. These were some of the references that I used to prepare for this. And I just want to call attention to Lucy Hoyne there. She also has a really good TED Talk, and it's the 3 Secrets of Resilient People. And it's truly, truly inspiring. Her daughter died, not by suicide, but her daughter died in a car accident. And it's just, her story is just so amazing. And the way she talks about resilient grieving, I would definitely ask you to know, not just the book, but go look for a TED Talk by her. And then Linda Pacta is from Naperville. She is a loss member, and she actually sent me her book, and she asked me to read her book. It is really I think it's very, very good. It just spoke to my heart. And the last, I would like to thank the loss program and the staff and the facilitators and the brave, resilient individuals and families that I have met throughout my 23 years. So, in the next slide, I'd like to have a special moment of gratitude for the 4th Sunday of the month Wilmette Support Group for the many ways that they have shown resilience and educated me about how to cope with loss. I think they have really taught me so much about how to navigate through this process. So I am grateful to them. So thank you. Okay. Now, as I conclude, and here is the conclusion. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Yes. Music always touches my soul. And I know for many of us, it can make us feel very, it brings up pain, but for others, it brings us peace. And as I conclude, I would like to just send this to you. send you this wish, this prayer, this as a blessing. It is from a Gaelic blessing, and I would like to pray this for all of you. So, Emily, let's see if we can do this. Can we get back to the other screen? Maybe not. Oops. Did I just knock that off? There. Okay. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. If you would have any questions or any comments, now is the time.
Thank you, Laraine. Everything was wonderful. It's really a wonderful presentation.
Absolutely. I'm just checking the chat, Laraine, to see if there are any, excuse me, see if there are any questions. I think mostly they're comments, just saying, you know, thank you for the information. I know a couple of people asked about your resource page. And so Debbie and I can make that available and make sure that we have that for folks who are looking for the resources also.
Okay.
And Cindy asked, when is there another presentation? So this this presentation is a little off of our schedule because of the July 4th holiday. So typically we will have a presentation on a different topic on the first Monday of every month. So clearly this is on the second Monday this month. But next month in August, one of our clinicians, Jessica, she's going to be talking about the specific needs of young adults in grief, which is a topic that we had requested when we did the presentation on adolescence. And so wanting to know, what is the grief experience like for young adults? How do they navigate that? How do we support young adults in our lives who might be grieving? So that'll be coming up on August 2nd. So it's early in the month, August 2nd. And if you receive the email for this presentation, you'll receive the email for future presentations. It's the same contact list. Well, and I will just say, Laraine, that I thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. One of the things I was saying to Laraine before she started was that part of what I remember was having a lot of difficulty putting my feelings and emotions into words and figuring out how to communicate about that. And I think seeing so many of those things just kind of listed there is something I kind of wish I had in my back pocket a few years ago, to give me some language to be able to talk about things and to be able to share what was helpful for me. And so I just thank you for continuing this work with this wonderful group of survivors that we have, and for continuing to show the care and compassion that you always do, Laraine. It's so appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laraine.
You're welcome.
I see the Klumpkins waving to you up there.
Okay. I haven't seen anybody. I didn't dare look at anybody. Okay.
Here, I'll remove the spotlight. Now
okay,
the chat with
here
you.
we are.
Nice to see you, Emily. Your face.
Thank you, Laraine.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm so glad you could all join us this evening.
Yeah.
Good night.
Lots of familiar faces. Hi, Tom. Hi, Peg. All right. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us. If there's ever any follow-up questions, you can always feel free to contact the LOST program. And I did just see, some chatting back and forth about group services and about individual counseling. For anybody who is in the Chicagoland area, we absolutely do have individual counseling through the LOST program. So if you've had trouble finding a counselor, or you're looking for some individual counseling support, please do let us know. That's a resource we certainly want to be able to provide also.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Oh, go ahead, Laraine. Sorry.
I just want to know, do you want a copy of those resources, or do you want me to just put my email address in the chat?
Yeah, so Laraine, you can put your email address in the chat, and if anyone contacts you directly, you can send them. And if not, I also have the PowerPoint, so I can make a copy. Your original email came from me, so feel free to send an email to Emily, and I'll be able to get them to you too. So that's fine. Thank you for that, Laraine.
Okay, and thank you so much for your patience with my madness with the yellow box and all the rest of the craziness.
I think you did great. I really do. I think I just didn't know how to help.
The technology failed you. It wasn't you. It was the technology.
No, I just
That's
exactly.
good.
And
We'll
I
blame it on
didn't
that.
Blame the computer.
That's so
I know
true.
the truth though.